Okay, two cities, and the gap between them genuinely messed with my head when I first worked it out. Stay with me. This is Singapore, 6 million people on an island about the size of New York City. And this is New York, older, richer, the city that invented the modern skyline. On paper, New York should win almost any infrastructure contest you can name. So here's the part that doesn't add up. New York first drew up plans for a single new subway line, the Second Avenue line, back in 1929. 1929. They are still building it today, almost 100 years for one metro line. In that same stretch of history, Singapore went from a swampy port with open sewers and slums, a country that didn't even exist yet, to one of the most ruthlessly well-designed places on the entire planet. Built from scratch in about 60 years. And once you see how they pulled it off, you can't unsee it, because Singapore doesn't build a city the way anyone else does. It does something stranger and a lot smarter. So let me show you, starting below the surface with the Singapore MRT train system. Let's start with what you'd notice on day one, the trains. In Singapore, at rush hour, a train pulls in every 2 to 3 minutes. Not, if nothing breaks, just every 2 to 3 minutes, full stop. Many have no driver at all. The line is run by a computer. It's so reliable that a delay of more than a few minutes can actually make the news. Now, New York, and I love the New York subway. It never closes. It's one of the great wonders of the world. Here's a detail I find weirdly beautiful. Much of Manhattan is still heated by steam, from a system built in 1882, warming the Empire State Building, Grand Central, even the UN. That wispy white smoke curling out of the orange and white street pipes in every movie? That's it. Gorgeous. And also kind of the whole problem, because so much of New York still runs on bones that old. More than a quarter of its subway cars are over 40 years old, and some signals still in daily use predate the Second World War. The trains aren't late because nobody cares. They're late because the city runs on century-old hardware it can't afford to replace. And that's the first clue. Singapore decided where its trains would go decades before the neighborhoods around them existed. Lay a map of Singapore's rail network over where people actually live, and you'll spot a ring, a loop connecting the city's outer edges to each other. So if you live on one side and work on the other, you don't ride all the way into the center and back out. You just cut straight across. Sounds small. It's enormous. Most transit systems are a wheel with no rim. Every spoke runs into the center, so every crosstown trip is a detour. Singapore built the rim on purpose, because they designed the network and the city as one object. And in 2026, they're closing that loop completely, while boring a brand new, fully automated line clear across the island, the Cross Island Line, around $30 billion, coast to coast. So one city fights to finish a single line. It started in 1929, while the other casually builds a new Cross Island Metro and closes a perfect ring in the same decade. Which raises the obvious question: how does anyone plan that far ahead and pull it off? And the answer is genuinely a little bit wild. Here's the thing, almost nobody outside urban planning knows. Before Singapore builds something for real, it often builds it first inside a computer. They've made a complete 3D digital twin of the entire country, fed with live data, so a planner can drop a proposed tower into the model and watch how it changes the wind, the shade, the foot traffic, the flood risk before a single shovel moves. And then something I find genuinely amazing. They started building a second digital twin of everything underground. Pipes, power, tunnels, cables. A map of the hidden city beneath the visible one. Because on an island this small, the space under your feet is as precious as the space above your head. Which is exactly why so much of Singapore is buried on purpose. Rail, roads, water, sewage, power, shoved into shared underground tunnels to free up the surface for people and parks. They've even put ammunition storage and water recycling plants below ground. The rule is simple and kind of beautiful. If it doesn't need daylight, get it out of the way. And here's the contrast that gets me. New York's underground grew the opposite way, not planned, but layered century on century into a glorious tangle nobody fully has a map of. There's an abandoned station under City Hall with chandeliers and stained glass skylights, sealed since 1945. There's a secret platform under the Waldorf, Track 61, reportedly built so President Roosevelt could arrive without anyone seeing his wheelchair. New York's underground is a treasure chest of accidents. Singapore's is a spreadsheet, everything laid out. And all of this runs on a planning horizon that's hard to believe. Singapore plans land use in layers, a master plan for the next 10 to 15 years, under a concept plan looking 50 years ahead. They're reserving land right now for people who haven't been born yet. Compare that to how most democracies build, in 4-year bursts, where the next election can cancel the last government's plans. New York's 2nd Avenue line says it all. Proposed in 1929, shelved in the Depression, shelved again in the 70s, restarted, and the first short phase finally opened in 2017, about $4.5 billion for a mile and a half of track. The most expensive subway, per mile, ever built on Earth. Not because New Yorkers can't engineer, they're brilliant by the way, but because the system around the engineering keeps tripping over itself. Singapore's superpower isn't money or even technology, it's continuity, the ability to point at a 50-year goal and just keep walking toward it. And nowhere does that show up more bizarrely than in the price of a Honda Civic. Here's a number that sounds invented. In Singapore, before you can buy a car, you first have to buy permission to own one, a 10-year government permit, won at public auction. Right now, that permit runs around $125,000. Not the car. The permit. The piece of paper that then lets you go buy the car. To put that in perspective, a basic Honda Civic, the most sensible commuter car on the planet, costs you about 20 grand in America. In Singapore, by the time you've bought the permit, the car, and the taxes on top, that same ordinary Civic can run you well past $150,000. The permit by itself often costs more than several brand new Civics would in a showroom back in the States. And it's not a tax grab. It's design taken to its logical extreme. On an island this small, you can't give everyone a car. There's no room for the roads. So permits are capped, deliberately, to keep traffic moving. And it works. Singapore started charging drivers to enter the city center in the 1970s, decades before London or Stockholm, and even now its expressways run near 60 kilometers an hour at rush hour. New York just became the first American city to copy the idea, half a century later. So they make driving expensive, then make every other option so good you don't mind. 200 kilometers of covered walkways, because it's tropical and pours, and they decided you shouldn't get soaked reaching the train. But the boldest thing Singapore ever designed wasn't about how people move at all. It was the ground itself, and what they grew on it. Right in the middle of the city, Singapore built a garden out of science fiction, a grove of giant glowing trees up to 50 meters tall that aren't trees at all. They're vertical gardens wrapped around steel towers with over 160,000 real plants growing on them. They harvest rainwater, some carry solar cells that generate power, and every night they light up and pulse in time to music, for free, while crowds stand underneath staring up. Next door sits that hotel shaped like a cruise ship, parked on 3 skyscrapers, an infinity pool running along the deck 57 floors up. Same instinct every time, design every detail, and don't apologize for it. But the most extreme version of that instinct still stops me cold, because a huge amount of Singapore didn't used to exist. Since colonial times, it has grown its own landmass by around a quarter, dredging sand, raising new ground out of the water where there was only ocean. Their airport, regularly voted the best on Earth, with a 7-story indoor waterfall pouring through the terminal, sits partly on an old seabed. They're now adding a vast Terminal 5 on reclaimed ground, built for 50 million more passengers a year on near-zero net energy. You can check out a video about this that I have on this channel. I'll link it below. And along the coast, the Tuas megaport, so large its outline is visible from space, on land pulled from the sea, run almost entirely by driverless vehicles and automated cranes from one control room. When it's done, it'll be the biggest fully automated port on the planet. Leave a comment if you'd like a video on that topic. Think about that. Singapore looked at the ocean and decided the coastline was a rough draft. If you run out of country, you build more country, a fundamentally different relationship with reality than almost anywhere else on Earth. Now, I don't want to sell you Singapore as a flawless utopia, because it isn't, and the honest version is more interesting anyway. All of this came at a cost. Old villages and heritage neighborhoods were flattened. Mangrove forests that once guarded the coast were largely lost. And the reason the country can plan 50 years ahead is partly that one political party has run it, basically unopposed, the entire time. Exactly the kind of long horizon control most democracies are built to prevent. And that's what makes the comparison so fascinating. Remember New York's glorious tangle, the chandeliered ghost station, the secret presidential platform, the 1880s steam still curling up through the streets. That mess is the price of a free, chaotic, century-deep city. Singapore's Polish is the price of its control. One has been trying to finish a single subway line since before your grandparents were born. The other ran out of land, so it built more. Neither is simply right, but only one of them is already living in a future the rest of us haven't reached yet. And that leaves the question I can't stop turning over. If you could plan a city 50 years ahead with no one to stop you, should you? Because somewhere in the Saudi desert, someone decided the answer was yes, and started building something so extreme that engineers still argue about whether it's even possible. A city with no roads, no cars, and no horizon. If Singapore is the most designed place on Earth, this might be the most impossible. But that's a story for next time.